Hey guys, so this is the analysis for Chinua Achebe's Vultures. I'm going to try and do mood, tone, diction, attitude, imagery all at once. So remember when you're filling in on your worksheets to just break it up into those different categories. You'll be glad to know that thankfully you can pause this whenever you want to. So there's no worries with me going too fast. So the one thing I am going to remind you of from the previous video is just the sort of 4 sections that the poem can be broken down into. Your first stanza is a description of the vultures looking at their prey. The second stanza is a musing on the part of the speaker about how love can exist in such a strange space. Then you go back to a description in your third stanza, but in the third stanza it's a description of the commandant at Belsen camp. And obviously there is meant to be a connection, a correlation between the vultures and the commandant. And your final stanza is then a sort of musing on the part of the speaker about love and evil and the perpetuity of evil even in the face of love. So you get description, musing, description, musing. And the mood sort of shifts a little bit within those different stanzas as well. So let's have a look at the opening stanza. In the greyness and dawn, I just want to switch to my brush tool. There we go. No, didn't switch to my brush tool. There. In the greyness and drizzle of one despondent dawn, unstirred by harbingers of sunbreak, a vulture, perching high on broken bones of a dead tree, nestled close to his mate, his smooth, bashed-in head. A pebble on a stem rooted in a dump of gross feathers, inclined affectionately to hers. So note we start with greyness, and that, together with this word despondent, sets our initial mood as being quite forlorn, quite hopeless. The word despondent itself means hopeless. It's a very sort of dreary opening to the poem. So in the greyness and drizzle of one despondent dawn, note the alliteration on despondent dawn. Note also the personification. Dawn is personified as someone who has given up hope, which is somewhat paradoxical because you would normally think of the dawn. The dawn is usually used to represent new hope, new beginnings, new day, but here it is a despondent dawn. They are vultures which are unstirred by harbingers of sunbreak. So they are not moved by the fact, they are unstirred, they are not moved by the fact that they are signs of daybreak. They're not moved by the fact that the sun is going to rise. So they are shown as being separate from a sense of hope that might come with daybreak, but it doesn't. They're unstirred by it. And that word harbingers we spoke about, it means messengers, but it has generally sort of negative connotations because it's considered, you normally would speak about harbingers of doom, so these harbingers of sunbreak, and the vultures are unmoved by this. They're sitting high on broken branches of a dead tree, and I've got a little picture of a vulture because of the dead tree in the background. And it's worth looking also at the metaphor of broken bones of a dead tree. This tree isn't just dead, there's a sense almost of underlying violence, a connotation or a connection there with violence. So if you're looking at diction, the word broken over here, and later on the word bashed in over here, there's this underlying violence that seems to sort of creep into the descriptions here. So the tree is a dead tree, broken bones. All of these things together are adding to this forlorn mood, to this sense of despondence, to the sense of hopelessness. And they're creating a fairly scary image, a fairly scary opening stanza, and yet one which shows contrast, which shows paradox. So we've got this despondence, we've got the dead tree, the broken bones, but at the same time the vulture nestles close to his mate. And that word nestles is such a great word in the context. You know, if you're looking at diction, the root of the word is obviously nest, and so it relates well with our vulture over there, but it also suggests affection and caring. So he nestles, I can't write and talk at the same time apparently, okay. He nestles his head in close to his mate, but look at how his head is described, a smooth bashed in head. And that bashed in suggests a sense of violence. And this picture doesn't show it quite all that well, but vultures often have these sort of weirdly shaped heads. There's my vulture. Little eyes. Brilliant drawing. I'm a great artist. And then, so this bashed in head, again, that diction, that relation to violence, and it's then described as being on a stem rooted in a dump of gross feathers. So if we're looking at diction, dump suggests rubbish, suggests garbage. And if you think of those feathers around the neck, quite often when you look at wildlife photos, and here I'm going away from the poem, so please don't add something like this into your matric answers. Quite often when you look at wildlife photos, those feathers are the ones that are covered in blood because the animal has been gorging itself on food. So it's this dump of gross feathers and gross, disgusting. It's really not a pretty picture that the speaker is creating of these birds. And yet the head is inclining affectionately towards his mate, and the incline means bending affectionately. Yesterday they picked the eyes of a swollen corpse in a waterlogged trench and ate the things in its bowel. Again, it continues with this really gross, sort of visceral description of what's going on. Doesn't even say they picked up the corpse. You know, the detail of they picked the eyes of a swollen corpse. So it's a particularly graphic, particularly horrific image that's being described here. I should maybe make my brush a little thicker. Give me 2 secs. Okie dokes, brush made thicker. So it's a particularly graphic image that we have here of eating the eyes of the swollen corpse. The body is bloated, it's gross, it's disgusting. And they ate the things in its bowel. So not just they ate the things in its guts or they ate the corpse, they ate the things in its bowel. And again, that sense of a really graphic, horrific image. Full gorged, they chose their roost, keeping the hollowed remnant in easy range of cold telescopic eyes. So once they had eaten their full gorged, then they go in and choose a place where they can keep a watch on this corpse to make sure nothing else gets there. I think what is interesting here is the hollowed and the cold and the telescopic give a sense of distance, a sense of remove. So we go from a sentence which is very graphic in its description to one that then takes a step back, is removed in the description, just as the birds have literally removed themselves from the corpse. I have seen, and I'm going to refer to the video again, I think it's Help Me Mr. Davies. He does a really good video on Vultures by Chinua Achebe. But he seems to think that this is referring to a gun sight. You know, telescopic eyes, easy range. I would completely disagree with that. I don't think it's referring to a gun sight at all. Vultures have incredibly good eyesight. And I think that cold telescopic eye is not a gun sight. It's the animal being able to remove itself from the sort of carnage below, the animal being able to step back, which in many ways is what the speaker is doing in a weird way. He's writing this, in many parts, incredibly graphic poem, and yet he steps back and he distances himself and he looks, he muses and thinks about what it is that he's seeing. So notice also at the end of this stanza the ellipsis. Okay, and the ellipsis shows us the sort of leading into the next stanza, because the speaker is thinking about what it is that he's just seen. And that first word, strange, tells us what his thoughts are. Strange indeed, how love, in other ways so particular, will pick a corner in that charnel house, tidy it up and coil up there, perhaps even fall asleep, her face turned to the wall. So he's saying it's really weird how love, which is normally very careful, particular in where it chooses to exist, is capable of existing in that charnel house, in that place of death. Is capable of existing between these two vultures who are carrion feeders, who have been eating the eyes and the bowels of a bloated corpse. So just a couple of other things to look at. Notice that love is personified. Okay, so love is particular, love is capable of choosing where to exist in that charnel house. And I'll come back to some more. Yeah, I think that's fine on the personification. Love, who is personified, is also not capable of existing in the entire space, because it is a disgusting space. So love exists in the corner. Love is separated to some extent. Love turns her back to the death and the decay that exists in that space, and makes a small little area that she tidies up and can then exist in that space. But even though she's existing in that space, she still turns her face to the wall, because she cannot look out into the broader space, into the death and destruction that is around her. Exclamation mark. This is an important point for the speaker, that yes, love can exist there, but only if love exists in that little small area. So then we go on to stanza 3. Is it going to let me move? Let me do that. There we go. Okay. And stanza 3 starts with the ellipsis. And so we get this idea of continuing thoughts on the part of the speaker. And if you look at the structure of the poem, there's no rhyme, there's no rhythm scheme. It is seemingly a flow of consciousness, a sort of musing, an unpacking on the part of the speaker, how he feels about this incredible situation where love can exist between vultures and love can exist between the commandant and his children. So the ellipsis leads us in, and this word thus is very important, because it tells us that just like love can exist in this first stanza between the two vultures, and just like the speaker finds it strange in the second stanza that this love can even exist, in the same way, love exists between the commandant at Belsen camp. Okay, so the thoughts, the ideas that come from the first two stanzas are carried on here, are connected here. Thus the commandant at Belsen camp, going home for the day with fumes of human roast clinging rebelliously to his hairy nostrils, will stop at the wayside sweet shop and pick up a chocolate for his tender offspring waiting at home for daddy's return. And you can see the revisiting of the ideas from the first two stanzas. There are the visceral, the gross details of the fumes of human roast clinging to his nostrils. It's such a repulsive image. It's such a powerful image as well. You know, he's going home and he's carrying with him aspects of his job. He's carrying with him the death of these hundreds of thousands, millions of Jewish people. I mean, not millions of people weren't killed at Belsen. And on a side note, they didn't actually have gas chambers at Belsen. But I don't know if Achebe knew that, so we're going to ignore that completely, the fact that they didn't have gas chambers at Belsen, and we're just going to assume that they did for the purposes of our poem. So what I was saying before I went off on my tangent is the commandant brings home this visceral, this gross, this terrifying, this horrifying reminder of what it is that he does during the day. And what it is that he does during the day is kill human beings. And it's the fumes of human roast. And I find, in terms of diction, the word roast is very strange. Because roast is generally what you would refer to when you are cooking meat, when you are cooking food. And I suppose, you know, if we think about the connection between the vultures and the commandant, the vultures in stanza 1 are described as eating food. And so I wouldn't say that the commandant physically feeds off the people that he is responsible for killing, but there's a suggestion of a sort of psychological feeding off of these people that he is killing. And the smell clings rebelliously to his hairy nostrils. So hairy, again, is part of the sort of gross description, this visceral description. And the idea that the smell clings rebelliously, it's almost like, if we consider this from the commandant's perspective, he finds it an inconvenience that the smell is clinging to him. It shouldn't be clinging to him. How dare the smell of these dead Jews cling to the inside of his nose? It's a very interesting choice of words, very interesting image as well, the smell clinging to his nostrils. And so this man, this monster, this killer, is paradoxically, here comes that contrast again, is paradoxically described as stopping at the wayside sweet shop. And even that description, you know, this sort of phrasing of wayside sweet shop, it doesn't say like the corner shop, wayside sweet shop. And the alliteration on sweet shop, no, it's not quite alliteration, skip that part. But wayside, there's almost something fairy tale about that, you know, the phrasing of that. He stopped at the wayside inn. And that feeds into, the contrast feeds into the horror that's created. And that action is an expression of affection. It's an expression of care. And he's picking it up for his tender offspring. And if we're thinking about and this is something that Mr. Davies discusses really well if you want to have a check of his video, but if you're thinking about that semantic field, and semantic field is when you draw words from a certain area and it creates a sort of underlying mood or attitude or feeling. Here, the semantic field, tender and roast, it's quite chilling. I'm not suggesting he's eating his children, but it's an interesting word for his tender offspring. Yes, it means caring, but it also means soft and succulent. And then again, this weird contrast, because we've got the word tender next to the word offspring. And offspring is quite a cold word. It's quite a removed word. You know, in terms of diction, a father you wouldn't talk about your offspring, you would talk about your children, your son, your daughter, your baby. Offspring is almost scientific, almost clinical. So again, that contrast that sort of runs throughout the poem. Tender, gentle, caring, but offspring. And these tender offspring are waiting at home for daddy's return. So again, in terms of diction, you're looking at the word home and you're looking at the word daddy's, because he doesn't say are waiting at his house. Home, connotations of warmth, connotations of care, and daddy. Daddy is protective. A daddy is, something far warmer and far more nurturing, the concept of daddy, than the concept of father. So, yeah, massive, massive contrasts throughout the poem. And then again, ellipsis. So our speaker is leading us into his next sort of series of thoughts about all of this. And he says, praise bounteous providence, if you will, that grants even an ogre a tiny glowworm tenderness encapsulated in icy caverns in a cruel heart, or else despair. For in the very germ of that kindred love is lodged the perpetuity of evil. So the speaker's giving us two choices. And he's saying you can either give thanks to the care of God, okay? You can praise providence. And in this case, providence is seen as bounteous. It's seen as extremely giving. The word bounty means that there is a lot of. So praise this extremely giving care from God, if you want to, if you will, that grants even an ogre a tiny glowworm tenderness encapsulated in icy caverns of a cruel heart. So you can give thanks for this ogre who has this teeny, we looked at what a glowworm is, this teeny little bit of tenderness that is wrapped up, encapsulated in actually what is a cruel heart. And it's described as the icy caverns of a cruel heart, because the heart is uncaring. The icy caverns, the heart, this is not a caring heart. This is the heart of a murderer. This is the heart of a monster. So you can give thanks that even within, and I'll show you a nice image, it's not quite a cavern, but you'll get the idea. So even within, and we can imagine this is our icy cavern, and it represents the heart of our commandant at Belsen. And here's this tiny little bit of light. And we can go, oh wow, that's amazing, because even though he's a bastard, even though he's cruel, which is what all the dark area in the cavern represents, there's still a little bit of love. We should give thanks to God. Or, and it doesn't seem to be a very good choice here, okay? Or we must despair. Because in the very germ, in the very seed of that kindred love is lodged the perpetuity of evil. So we've got the icy caverns, okay? And then we've got the glowworm, the tenderness. That's like the little seed, okay? The love is the little seed. That's what's going to grow. That's what's connected to the next generation. Kindred refers to family. So the kindred love, we can argue, is the love for his children, the love that will grow into the next generation. But we need to despair, our choice here. We can despair because firmly fixed, lodged, I'm not very good with this pen, firmly fixed, lodged within this little seed here, this little seed of love, is actually the continual, I'm about to use the word perpetuation, which I shouldn't, because I'm trying to explain the word perpetuity. Lodged within this little seed is evil that will continue. On and on. Each generation successively, there will be evil lodged within this love. So the choice is a particularly bleak choice that he gives us. You can give thanks that even within this horrific evil, there is a teeny bit of love. Or else you can despair, you can give up. Because actually within that teeny bit of love, evil will always perpetuate. Evil will always carry on. And it's suggested in the very germ, the very seed, it's suggested it's going to continue into the next generation. So I hope you guys understood. If you didn't, feel free to leave me questions at some point, some vague, nebulous point in the future. I will try and answer those questions. Take care.